Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Episode 537. And also us. For Monday, March 25th, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. When it comes to AI and marketing, it's safe to say we're typically talking about consumer marketing initiatives. But what about business-to-business marketing? Why are B2B CMOs largely holding back? And what will change the calculus? Tonight, we'll discuss. Also, why it's time for a serious talk about marketing ethics, the implications of breaking up big tech, whether podcasting is right for your brand, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal consultant at Future Fourth, Mr. Dave Delaney. Hi, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Now, next up, we have the founder of Firebrand Group, which was acquired recently by Proponent, brand consultant and futurist, Mr. Jeremy Goldman. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Glad to finally get you on the program. Loved having you. Loved the fact that you accepted this invitation. Now, also with us, we're delighted to have back the CEO of both Twit TV and artisanal agency, Ms. Lisa Laporte. Lisa, welcome back.
Thank you, Bob. It's good to be here.
And he's the president and chief creative officer of New York agency Allscope, as well as a board member of Mashburn Enterprises. We welcome back Mr. Jonathan Sackett. Jonathan, what's going on?
Bob, I would like to tell you that I am one of two people on the show tonight that has recently been released from the hospital.
I know, both of us have.
You would be the other person.
Well, mine was outpatient surgery, so.
Oh, no, let's not talk about me then.
Well, let's just jump right into the news. First up, the news was overwhelmingly saturated with stories about AI this past week. It might have had something to do with the fact that Adweek happened to have a conference on artificial intelligence, but that's a whole other story. Now, the articles out there, they range from the inevitable move toward mass personalization to avoiding algorithm biases to machine-led decision-making and beyond. But one truth stood out for me in all this news. AI-infused marketing is the province of the business-to-consumer sector, while B2B is largely ignoring the tech. Dave, is this simply prudence on the part of B2Bers? Not B&Bers, that would be a whole other story, right? B2Bers, or is it dangerous to their future prospects? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I've been reading a fair amount about it and watched the CMO of IBM Watson speak recently. And she mentioned, how the adoption of B2B AI investment has been rather slow. And she quoted, "It's not magic, it's hard work." And that's part of the reason why. But she went into, and I was reading other studies, like an IBM study that said that 60% of C-suite are holding off due to privacy concerns. So I think part of it is that people are holding off partly because of privacy concerns. But
wouldn't B2B be the safe place when it comes to privacy concerns? Because it's just like when we're talking about business to consumer, the landmines are much worse in that sector.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean that was from the article, so I found that to be interesting. I mean, I suppose everybody's concerned with privacy concerns these days. I also read a Forbes article by Pete Appel, who wrote the first challenges for companies who are stuck in their traditional ways that work for now. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. A lot of companies are sort of stuck in their ways. And another angle to this is the fact that the sort of cycle, an average B2B customer journey is, I think it's a sales cycle is like 17 inbound and outbound touch points. And so AI can help measure these interactions and customize the content to meet their needs, but it's really a matter of jumping in. And I think a lot of people are sort of scared to jump in at this point.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about AI and marketing is everybody goes to the big bells and whistles applications of artificial intelligence. But AI is infused in everything. And the one thing about this article that was inspiring this story about the fact that B2B is lagging behind B2C in adoption is it really, aren't AI applications being applied to just about everything that marketers are using? I mean, if you're using Salesforce, you're using AI.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the companies that don't jump into at least researching AI for their businesses are going to fall behind, because I mean, it's already starting to happen, obviously, and the big boys will get in there first. But it's really important for everybody to at least research and study it for their own businesses, for sure.
Well, that's interesting, because it's not building to building, right? You're still dealing with people, and it's also artificial intelligence. But to Bob's point, they're not necessarily looking at it as automated intelligence, which you're already using at your call center. I guarantee they are. If they're not, do you know how much each individual call would cost? I think that they're probably using it, but not leveraging it as AI as an entity. That would be my guess.
Absolutely.
You also, I think, have to think about the fact that when it comes to AI, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is something that improves itself based off of its usage of data. The more data, the better, right? Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And as a result, if you don't have enough data points, then you can't get as much of a delta out of your use of AI. So I think that
you're right. You're probably replicating your mistakes.
Well, and you also have to have the people in place to be able to interpret that AI, that can actually, or interpret that data, I should say.
What drives this mindset as a whole? I mean, Lisa, when you're talking about B2C marketing, obviously there's lots of obvious uses and applications of AI at this point. Everything from chatbots to call centers, as Jonathan was saying. There's lots of opportunities to leverage AI in very, very sexy ways. Why is it that B2B seems so resistant? Is it just a matter of we're a sales-driven organization and we feel that the personal touch is more important, or is there something else at play?
I think there's a little bit more at play, because B2C is always an easier play, even when I'm placing, B2C buys versus B2B. I think there's more data points, as everyone was pointing out. I think everyone's trying to navigate the AI landscape still and really understand what it is. So it's not unusual that I see B2C. I mean, B2C was the biggest thing that we've ever had on Twit for 12 years. It's super easy, super, accessible to people. And I feel that B2B takes longer to nurture and takes more time. I mean, the sales cycle for B2B or B2E is so much longer than a B2C. And I think everyone's kind of stepping back to see how this is going to play out. And they tend to take longer than your B2C vendors. And I just think there's such an explosion of different tools and services out there. I mean, me personally, I've been having tons of AI, marketers reaching out to me, like, you can integrate this within your system for what we're trying to do. And I just think it takes longer for a B2B play. So I think they'll get there. I just think maybe it's a little overwhelming and they're not sure of the right path yet.
I'm still of the mindset, and Dave, just a second, because I want to frame a question to you, because I'm still of the mindset that I'm basically on the fence on this issue about whether or not B2B marketers need to be leveraging artificial intelligence more aggressively. In a lot of ways, because it's such a long lead cycle, as Lisa said, and it's so much about that personal touch and, reaching out and forming relationships. And it's such a sales-driven operation when you're in a B2B setting. I mean, not having AI applications really wouldn't harm that, would it? I mean, it's not really putting them at any kind of disadvantage in their marketplace as of now, is it?
I think they can do it on scale if they have, especially for larger companies. For like a smaller company or mid-sized company, traditionally, the sales team understand the market and they understand the customers. But I think for very large companies, I think AI can definitely save a lot of time. But I think also, getting to the original question of what's stopping people from buying, I also read in a Martech article about how the average buying team at larger companies, is 6.8 people. And so that means that's 6.8 people you have to convince, and they have to understand the value of AI in order to even make a decision. So, or at least the majority of those people. So I think, convincing folks that it is needed is something that's might take a while longer.
Yeah, and trying to present your ideas to that 0.8 person is really tough.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. But
aren't you getting what I'm saying?
I wanted
to.
But this is a really great point. This is a really great point to be making. Not the 0.8 point, but
yeah,
but the point about needing to convince 8 people. At the beginning of the sales cycle, yeah, I can see lots of uses for AI applications where you're basically trying to find that one person and you're trying to seed the market with lots of messages and you're trying to keep some kind of conversation going and alive out there in the marketplace so that you can reel in some new prospects for the sales team. So is it just a matter of B2Bers trying to figure out where in the sales cycle AI is most applicable to them? Because for me, that's where it seems to be the disconnect.
I think it's slower going. Like when there's more case studies for businesses to take note of, I think that's when they're going to jump on the bandwagon. You look at like B2C, as Lisa mentioned, and like, AI for consumers has been around for a long time now. And even before that, when you think of like simple things like movie phone, like, why don't you tell me the movie you'd like me to, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. We're used to that as consumers, but I think it's a harder, tougher, longer sell. And I think there needs to be more case studies. The video I watched with the CMO of IBM Watson, she had some great examples like Scott's Miracle Grow, who used AI to measure weather data to forecast sales by region. And it ended up increasing their revenue by 30 million in sales as a result of doing that. So there's some good examples in that video.
I'm so glad you brought that up because there's Bob, you also brought up a really good point that I don't want to leave off this topic. If the way we're looking at it, first of all, AI is such a broad net, right?
Right. That's my big problem with it. I mean, it's such a broad net, and I think people, when they hear AI, they're thinking of very specific things, like some kind of artificial intelligence that I'm having a conversation with, instead of thinking about
there's a robot sitting next to me with his eyes and lips moving.
Right.
That's because it's a category. It's not one specific technology.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's two things within that. Number one, AI is casting such a broad net. Number two, which is what you guys were touching on, is where does the authority within an organization lie to make the right decision on what types of AI to use when, under which channels? Because the reason why I bring that up, my brother's a tech guy. And, he's been the IT director for Kohler and Harley Davidson and companies like that. And the thing is they're throwing AI solutions under him, but he's not a marketing guy. And he doesn't have a marketing person at his side saddle so that he can say, look, what's our objective from a business perspective? What are we trying to achieve? How can AI automate that? And how can our backup hardware and software archive that, trigger that communication, utilize that for future marketings based on time, date, personality, and traits? That's where it's really missing, is because the organizations, particularly from a B2B standpoint, do not know where it should live within their house.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've had the experience in the past of working with people who, it's the kind of right brain, left brain types. Like for example, in a business that's focused on content marketing and creating tons of great, creative, amazing content. You really need to be, you need to have someone by your side who is more analytical, who can measure and see the results, given, Google Analytics or what have you, to be able to tell you what's working, what's not. So it's a combination, as you're saying.
Isn't this a little bit oxymoronic though in some ways? Because what we're talking about is we need someone sitting by our side helping us make better decisions, and that's what AI can also do. It's almost like from a short-sightedness standpoint, Lisa, are we just are marketers as a whole? Are we just ignoring the full breadth of what's AI can bring to our business, helping us to make decisions that are more informed and more data-driven and frankly, more effective.
Why don't you just tell me your marketing goals?
Right. Well, I think there's just a lack of pairing the two, as everyone's been pointing out. You need to marry the technology with the marketing, and a lot of marketing people know nothing about technology, and a lot of technical people need the insights from the marketing. As someone who's been sitting on, I probably had about 5 different AI meetings with how to improve our network as well as my agency in reaching more people in business. So I'm kind of going through this myself. And what I find in the landscape is there's so many AI tools out there. I don't even know where to start. What are the most proven ones? What are the best? And I'm talking with clients. This is the first year I've signed more B2B and B2E clients than I have B2C. So it's a different animal for every single company. And we can do some customized critiquing to our ad copy and things that we're doing here. But the reality is what tools should they pick and use, and what tool may work for Google isn't going to work for, Worldwide Tech or somebody else. So
I think that, Lisa, that's a great point. That's a great point. That is a great point, because if I can just point this out real quick, Lisa is incredibly smart, and she was also very late for this show today. So for everybody listening out there, I just want to know. But Lisa's like, I hate that guy, but only because Bob brought up my point that it was an oxymoron, I want to address that, because the thing is this: what type of tires should I put on my car? I'm a manufacturer of Porsche. Well, where are the cars being sold? What type of castings do I have here? What type of pistons am I running on the wheel itself? What type of rims do I have? Can I fit a low profile tire? That's the thing. So it is a little bit ironic and a little bit oxymoronic, but what has to happen,
I think ironic is the correct term. I used oxymoronic incorrectly, I believe, but that's okay.
Okay, but it still doesn't help the fact that Lisa was late for the show today. No, but
I will say honestly, she was not late.
Just to finish my point, and then for the rest of the show, we're all going to give Lisa a ton of crap just for no reason. So I think that's the thing, is that I have found in dealing with some of the larger organizations out there, if you make decisions in isolation, you're not only hanging your neck out there, but you're not truly understanding what's in place from a hardware software perspective, what's in place from an objective of a differing department or whatever. That's why you got to team up on decisions like this to make the right one.
Well, and also to Lisa's point earlier about just about learning this stuff and understand and trying to grasp and get an idea of like how AI can help your business. I think this is where, especially early stages, it might be worth like talking to an AI specialist or a consultant, someone like Kate O'Neill or Christopher S. Penn, someone like that who really truly understands AI, to bring them into your company to take a look and say, okay, these are the opportunities on the table that you could do,
We all have room to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I could talk about this one forever. Obviously, there were a lot of articles on the subject, and we could, but I'm going to move on. Next, with all this technology in play for marketers, there's once again a growing call for industry introspection and a revival of discussions about marketing ethics, one of my favorite topics, something that we've talked about here on the program many times. When should we disclose when a consumer is talking to a machine? How should we be disclosing our data usage? All these questions that constantly come up, and we never seem to get some kind of standardized industry approach to dealing with these issues. But given the industry's past record of discussing but never doing anything meaningful about the ethics question, Jonathan, what will it take to move this conversation into the action category?
That's a great question. Okay, so do my fellow panelists remember this? Years ago, I was in the legendary Walmart pitch where I was with Draft FCB. We won it, and then they stripped it from us a week later. Do you guys remember this?
Yes, it's the Watergate of all. What is it? Nobu is the Watergate hotel of the advertising industry.
Do the rest of you guys remember this?
No, I'm learning.
Okay, we were on the cover of what, Bob? New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and everything else.
What happened was there was some backroom dealing between Howard Draft and the what was her name?
Lisa Rome.
Lisa Rome at Walmart, and apparently Walmart had all kinds of regulations about it, and after awarding all the business to Draft FCB, pulled everything from them. And
Oh, I do remember that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I was in that legendary pitch, and I remember coming back. I was giving a speech in Los Angeles. I live in Chicago, and I lived in Chicago then. I was giving a speech at the Mobile Marketing Association in Los Angeles, and that's where they held up the famous Cannes Lions ad that we did that started to blow the cover. It was two lions fornicating, and it said, "Draft FCB, it's good to be on top." And then apparently there were bribes and all this other crap. So I get all these messages to get back to my office. I get on a plane. I leave my speech early. I get on a plane. I come back, and my computer's confiscated along with anybody else who was on the pitch team.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
with that, it right then and there, I went into my boss's office and I said, "My computer's gone. What's going on?" "Well, Walmart's about to fire us." Even though it took years off of my life and everybody else on the teams. And I said, "Well, who do we have from back then it wasn't an ethics standpoint, it was a PR standpoint. Is there a crisis management? Do we have something like that?" So what happened was the merger of Draft FCB was just going through. I was the head of digital at the time. And they wanted me. So my new job was to go around to all of our clients and apologize. So all of the clients, global clients of Draft FCB, I made it to two of those companies and got berated by those people saying, "How can you work for such an unethical organization?" and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, what am I doing here? Why am I didn't do, what am I going to do? Will HTML for food? I mean, I got nothing to bribe. So I walked away and I moved on to Boston at Arnold. But the reason why I bring that story up is because those situations are self-replicating. And if you look at what's going on right now, I love the idea. Unfortunately, it's predominantly in healthcare, pharmaceutical corporations, and things like that even have a what did you call it, Bob?
An ethicist. I mean, hiring an ethicist to come in and help people make decisions that are ethical and sound business decisions, sound marketing decisions.
I love the idea of it. The problem that I have seen, now remember, I come from a background of the Martin Agency, DDB, Martin, DDB, Arnold, who else? What doesn't matter. You guys know that I came from big agencies, and what happened was we had a chief diversity officer, and what happened was I was never invited to one of those meetings because I'm a white guy, maybe, I don't know. I never saw us making any change out there. Maybe there was internal meetings or something, I don't know. But it seems to me that if you're gonna take an ethic stand, it's got to be both internal and external, so that you're saying, look, here's how we're going to make real change. Johnson & Johnson, one of our clients, we're going to help you make ethical decisions on the right product for the right people with the right cautionary tales.
But my question is that the right approach to take? Hiring a marketing ethicist seems like it's a really great decision, because it says that we're going to be committed to ethics and we want to make sure that we're making the right decisions in everything that we're doing. However, what it really does is say that this company is going to go it alone and try to establish our own ethics, rather than saying the industry as a whole needs to have some kind of marketing ethical approach to the business, like any other business would have. Like if you're a lawyer, you have to take an ethics class. If you're a doctor, you have to take an ethics class, a medical ethics class. And you have to refresh those classes on a regular basis. In marketing, we're just running free. We have no ethical restrictions on our practices.
I agree with you. That's why I'm saying that. And again, this is coming from Ogilvy, et cetera, where I came from. That the diversity person taught diversity inside, not culture. And there's an inherent difference between that. And I think you're absolutely right. I would love to see, not us going for the holy grail of the dollar and us going for the right things to do, but spreading that out there amongst verticals, amongst channels, because let's face it, one of the topics that's going to be coming up here later on about the Samsung phones,
Spoiler.
ethics run rampant, and it runs wild, and there's no governance or guardrails to it. What I'm saying is I have never seen what you're talking about, Bob. I've never seen it internally or externally. I would love to see it in action and actionable so that we're all partaking in it to say, hey, this isn't the right thing to do. I can entertain you with a Skittles commercial all day, but at the end of the day, we're selling candy to kids, and you got to be ethically responsible for that.
I mean, I think the other thing just I want to quickly add, because it's going back to something Bob said, which is just, should we basically be establishing, benchmarks for the industry at large, or should we be bringing these things internal? I think we can do both. I think that
absolutely.
And I know that you obviously would agree with that. I think that sometimes what companies do is they they try to, hire a role like that, or have an agency, to be, focused on that, or a consultant, because they want to establish the fact that the industry has to move. I mean, we should be so lucky that enough people start a groundswell so that the agency world in general, and that brands, are held to a higher standard. And I think that sometimes, basically, let's not having marketing ethics be a differentiator. Let it be something that just people expect in general.
Well, and the question too. Yeah, it was. And the question really is then, who puts these ethics together and who enforces them, which would be my question.
Yeah, I would say Jonathan Sackett.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a huge divide among advertisers, media companies, and agencies. Because the ANA is trying to establish some kind of standards for ethical behavior on the part of agencies, but is not really policing themselves. And the agencies are trying to establish how they're going to work with the clients, how they're going to work with brands, but they're not policing themselves. And it's just this ongoing issue of people pointing fingers at each other. I mean, Lisa, what needs to happen here in order for the industry to get in line around some basic ethical standards? Or is this just a pipe dream?
Well, I think ethics and integrity need to come back to everybody. I mean, I feel that a lot of people, and hearing the Walmart story, yeah, I would not want to be going around apologizing to all my clients. I'd rather do the right thing immediately. So it'd be great for everybody to come up with the guidelines. It's kind of like the IAB. I don't want the IAB making all of the guidelines for me as a podcaster putting out podcasts, because they totally miss what networks need. So I feel that if we're going to set up, marketing ethics, my integrity and ethics are intact because I don't know another way to do it. But I think it should be inclusive of everybody coming in and doing the right thing. And if companies don't have it, they should just bring in like a professional coach anyways to look at, what is missing in their company. And if they don't have integrity and ethics, you got to start there. But to set a standard as a whole, I think everyone needs to participate, or it's going to be a moot point.
It'd be great to see like larger companies come together and develop, an ethics guidelines for other companies to follow. Because I feel like if it's not done sooner or later, then, we'll get it done by the FTC or someone like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
And taking it one step further, I mean, it's just like if you establish those guidelines, you also make people get a certification, and that certification can become a hiring criteria. It can also be a firing criteria. If you don't hold up to your ethics standards, you lose your certification and you can't be hired back into the industry. I mean, things like that are part and parcel of certain fields that have a lot of problems surrounding ethics. I mean, lawyers are almost as hated, if not more hated. I forget, it goes back and forth between advertisers and lawyers. We're at the bottom of the list all the time as far as public trust. But they have an ethics board to review, and they deal with ethics all the time. It seems like marketers need some kind of standard. Would that be appealing to you, Jonathan? I mean, to know that if someone has an ethical standard certification and that you're only hiring people with that certification, and if they lose their certification, they lose their job.
As long as it, I wish I could put a tighter governing belt on this, but as long as it makes sense and as long as people are actively partaking in it. The problem with some of these corporate quizzes, I remember I had to take one at Ogilvy, and one of the things that they had us do, you could just keep hitting an answer until you hit the right answer, and then it would advance to the next screen. That was a certification for whatever the hell it was. It was something to do with that lawsuit that they lost prior to me getting there. I don't want to give the hint that wherever I go, there's something screwed up going on. This was long before I got there, but I do listen. I would feel better if everybody started at being a good person, but that just is not going to be the case. So as far as our industry goes and our profession, which is what we should refer to it as, this is a profession. And as long as you're doing the right thing and doing good by other people and allowed to contribute to the doing of good and entertainment and advertising and marketing, and it's creativity with accountability. That's what I would love to see.
Well, moving on, Adweek brought some interesting perspective this week to
if you'd like me to keep talking, I will.
No, that's okay. We've got you under control. Adweek brought some interesting perspective this week to the debate about whether the U.S. should break up its biggest tech companies over antitrust issues by looking back to the original AT&T breakup. I found this pretty fascinating, Lisa. The concerns from the ad community are unsurprisingly similar, but do we have more to be concerned about a breakup now than we did then? What's your take on the way this article was written, and also whether or not what this perspective gives you in terms of the concerns that the ad industry had back then as opposed to the concerns that we have now?
Well, I'm not really sure where to start with this. First of all, Google, Amazon, and Facebook and all these guys are too big to break up now. I wish politicians would quit talking about breaking up these huge tech giants when they know nothing about them and how they work. I mean, the reality is they're too big to break up. It's not going to happen. And frankly, breaking up the telecom company 40 years ago did nothing for us. So what? It gave us, one big market, 7 small markets. They're all back together. It doesn't matter today. I don't think that's really, going to happen. I think Amazon, Facebook, Google, and of course they threw in Apple and a bunch of others are continue to grow. They're going to continue to be large. If by chance somebody does get in and they're able to actually try to break up these giant companies, I just see the impact on the marketing industry being the same. I mean, we're just going to look at this and go, oh, great, more people to sell for, more people to figure out, more people to go through to try to navigate the landscape. I mean, Google's getting in trouble all over the world, so, they might take care of themselves in a certain way. But I really see this as being a benefit to our community if they're able to break us up. And if they're not able to break these guys up, which is probably the case, we're just going to continue to be using a few giant players when we're out there doing our sales and marketing. So I just think it's not going to matter either way. And I honestly don't think they're going to have a shot at breaking them up.
Okay, so you're of the opinion that the tech giants should not be broken up. Does everybody agree with Lisa, or is there any?
I wouldn't say it's my opinion. It's just based on what I'm seeing today. I don't think it's going to happen.
Fair enough. Anybody else have a contrary take on that as far as what's going on with the big tech breakup idea? I mean, for me, I'm looking at it and going, some of the companies are really susceptible and really probably might even help the situation for them to be broken up. I mean, Amazon comes to mind because Amazon is trying to get a piece of every transaction out there. It seems like they're very open or very vulnerable to some kind of breakup suggestion, as opposed to Google, or which basically is so integrated on top of itself. It would be really difficult to break them up. Jonathan, you know a lot about the space. What would you say?
I think we lost Jonathan.
I think we did. Jeremy, can you?
I got actually. So I'll tell you. I'm
sorry, guys. It keeps digitizing. For some reason, it's turning into gibberish for me.
Well, maybe try closing a few windows on your computer. But Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are a few different components to this. I mean, there's actually a political component, which I think is important to look at actually also, which is that we do have a problem right now with the economy in terms of the kind of level playing field or lack thereof. And there has to be kind of an open question that when you're trying to run a whole entire economy, is the lack of competition good? I think that most people, if you take a step back, you just say, yeah, it's not really good for the overall situation within the ad tech community, within the economy in general. And for that reason, there has to be some type of movement. Now, the movement that's been suggested by Warren in particular, I think is not. It's not going to fly in the way that it's been suggested. But I think that in some ways somebody has to suggest something big in order to then have a compromise solution or two that then improves the situation from what it is now. Because right now, we really are in a situation where you kind of have to ask yourself, how can somebody come in and compete with these companies? And if the answer is, you have no idea how that would possibly happen, then you kind of have to say, well, maybe something has to change. That's the point of regulation.
That's right. And Jeremy, I'm interested in your thoughts on this because you're probably much better at it than I am. But the thing is that the rules, and Lisa for that matter, the rules for a breakup are outdated by the technology of today.
Agreed.
So, what's that?
I said agreed. So how are you going to break it up? I mean, a lot of people keep talking, and my attitude is, show me the plan. Oh wait, you don't even know what Google does, or what they own, or what Amazon does, and how much they own, and all this stuff that's integrated. I mean, I can almost guarantee you that Warren doesn't know what AWS means, or what that data storage is at Amazon, or anything along those lines. So until I hear a real politician that actually has some tech chops stand up and actually present a game plan to break up these companies, it's not going to happen. Because like you said, the laws are older than the technology, and the technology is going to be different in 6 months than it is today.
The old race of the bulletproof vest versus the bullet, and the bullet's beating the vest right now because the technology, what's around the corner? What's the next AI product around the corner? You don't know. So how can you anticipate that with a breakup law? You can't. So
but I'll say, I mean, I think that it's a very valid point to say that you don't have necessarily the people who are the experts in terms of how to do it, because it hasn't been done in the economy that we live in now. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to happen or it wouldn't have positive impacts. But you raise, I think, a really important point, which is what are the unintended consequences of doing it, even if you can do it, right? Like if you if you basically break up Google into two parts, or Amazon into two parts, or whatever, what is the innovation that happens in the marketplace as a result of that by a third-party player that then becomes non-competitive, creates a non-competitive environment a few years down the line? So you basically will create, and I think that this is the world that we live in now, is that new technologies, when they're executed properly, can propagate very quickly. And that's a thing that, like, when you were making a widget 50 years ago, it would take you a while to build a monopoly. And I think, frankly, whatever monopolies you break up, we do live in a world where it's likely you will see other monopolies that will have to be broken up in the near term. So maybe the answer is regulation is a thing that has to happen more and more often, as opposed to, once every 50, 100 years.
Well, yeah, you're right. You're definitely right on the timing. Part of the problem is you break up one and create 50, but you're creating the 50 not in the same space that the one took part in. You're creating 50 others, and now you've got 50 other problems.
Oh, but here's something to consider, though, and I want to play devil's advocate here and go back to the AT&T breakup, the original AT&T breakup. Because, they all ended up to find their way back together again, at least to two giant companies, and AT&T is making an adjusted amount that's about equal to what they were making back then. So there's still a monopoly. Right, but at the same time, when they were broken up, they were innovating. They were in competition, and they were innovating. And we have a lot of great things that came about in the telecommunications space that may not have happened at the same rate if it had just been one giant company that didn't have any other motivation to not rent phones and keep landlines.
No, Bob, that's a great point, but you're wrong.
Okay, thank you.
That's such a great line.
Well,
I have to quote you on that.
My whole thing is, we can't get our political system to get together to pass a budget and to meet at the same table to do anything. Do you really think they're going to get their act together to break up these giant tech giants? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to even be a question or even a possibility in the next 5 years. I
would just like to see like a pros and cons, breaking up for dummies. Like, the pros and cons of what this means for the consumer, because breaking up is hard to do.
Hey, now's a good time to tell you guys that Jeremy just messaged me, quote, "That's a great point, but you're wrong. I want that on a t-shirt."
I'll give you a royalty deal.
I think, look, sometimes, my dad always taught me to measure twice and cut once, because my summer job was working for my dad, and I wanted to kill myself.
Was that giving circumcisions?
But it was HVAC, but that was a better joke. So yes, okay, let's call it that. But the thing is that what you have to do is you have to look at every situation under its own lens and decide and determine and try to anticipate the future. If you're going to open Pandora's box on 50 new problems, or do it right the first time. Now, to Bob, to your point, breakups seldomly solve the problem. And
yeah,
frankly,
they never solve the problem. They never solve the problem at hand, which is big companies are bad, and we need to make sure that we give the market enough competition so that they can get new ideas out. But breakups do have a lot of good effect in terms of putting these companies into competition with each other and actually driving innovation among these broken up companies.
Well, sort of. If you really take a look at the evolution of the wheel, a lot of these companies, you've got interdepartmental competition, which is doing the same thing as intra-corporation competition. So, and I won't get into some long-winded bull crap about that. I can say crap, right?
You can say crap.
Okay, good. Bull crap. But the thing is that on paper and in isolation, competition is good, and that's exactly what capitalism is. The challenge is are we creating a better, friendlier, healthy sense of skepticism and competition on behalf of the recipients, on behalf of the consumers, or is it an illusion that these companies are going to end up finding a way like an amoeba to get back together again?
Always the question when we're talking about antitrust regulation. Well, I want to move on to the final topic. The branded podcast is quickly becoming the tactic du jour in marketing. It's kind of the new blog. Everybody wants a podcast the same way that everybody wanted a blog several years back. So, Jeremy, when does it make sense and when is it a mistake? What do you think about the fact that a lot of brands are getting into the podcast game and suddenly saying, hey, we're podcasters?
First off, this is a great topic, and maybe I should cover this on the Future Proof podcast that I host. But in all seriousness,
he just lost his shameless plug at the end.
Right. No, do it again. Do it again.
I think that was a shameful plug, actually. But the thing that's great about podcasts is that they're so immersive, and people spend so much time with podcasts that it actually is really great to have a well integrated ad. And I think the other thing that's nice that you really kind of see happening is that every time a new medium pops up, people start to think, what can an ad look like in this medium? And I realize that podcasts have been around for a while, but they've really only started to be monetized en masse, in the last few years. For the most part. And I think that there was a really good quote that Damon John had in an article I read about this, which is, ZipRecruiter and other people who are trying to integrate in with podcasts, you can find some content that aligns very nicely with the types of people who you want to use your platform or who you want to hire you if you're ZipRecruiter, if you want companies to go use and engage with the platform. You can integrate very nicely with some content that's out there, and you can find something or actually even create something yourself. But I think that podcasts work so well because they're so immersive. I would say, though, the one thing that I think everybody has to be hesitant about is that you need to find not just the right content to align yourself with. You don't just want to have like a 30-second blurb at the start of a show because that's really old school advertising. But I mean, I will say that I think that the more podcasts that are out there, the more the audience gets diffused. And that's why I think that actually, if you can get the right podcasts that you can find a way to work your brand into and sponsor in some way and tell your story, but if they're B2B focused, like I'm okay, for instance, if I can get integrated with a podcast that only has, let's say, whatever, 1,000 listeners every week, if they happen to be CDOs, chief digital officers of Fortune 1,000 companies, and that's who I want to reach out to if I'm a huge digital consulting firm. So it's really about the alignment. If you can figure it out, that's the key.
As soon as you said, as soon as you said diffused audience, I just went. Lisa and I are probably sitting here cringing because brands diffusing our audience even further sounds like the worst thing ever, right, Lisa?
Well, I have very strong opinions on this just because I own a podcast network, but I completely am allergic to branded podcasts. I stay away from anything where I see that someone's doing their own podcast. I'd much rather all the podcasts in my deck besides my shows are not owned by any brands, and they do ad reads. So I like that. But branded podcasts, I just don't find that's the way to go. I think find the podcast network that has your niche that you want to reach, and then that's where you want to advertise on. That's, I'm probably more old school when it comes to that, but anytime I see something's a branded podcast, I avoid it and I try to find somebody who's doing the content that I really want to hear from, but they're not being paid by that person to do it. I don't mind if they're ad supported.
Can I ask?
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm the same way, and I consider myself right now a recovering podcaster. So I've been podcasting since 2005,
wow.
And the second parenting podcast ever, 2 boobs and a baby. That was me and my wife.
That's awesome.
Well, I think, listen, the 2 points that I would bring up, number one, Jeremy brings up a really good point, but.
Okay, you got your line.
No, and then the other thing is that I at least I hear what you're saying. We own, under Mashburn Enterprises, everything from restaurants to car dealerships to ad agencies, you name it. And we also own podcasts, and the number one podcast that we own is called Two Black Guys with Good Credit. And I don't know if you guys have heard of it or seen it around. We've been getting a ton of, but what you're talking about, Lisa, is a branded entity versus one with a cause or a mission, right?
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah.
What I'm saying is we're not a toy factory. What we are is we say that particular cast tells you ways to build your credit.
Yeah, but we're trying to distinguish though between podcasts that are pure content and might be owned by companies, but they're still pure content, as opposed to this is Bob's Hardware Store doing the Bob's Hardware Store podcast, which may or may not be interesting, but it's really just a big commercial for Bob. So go ahead, Dave. You were going to say something?
All I was going to say was that I do have a tip for those advertising on podcasts, and that is do 15-second reads or 15-second spots, because every time a podcaster starts getting into an ad, I hit the forward 30-second on my podcast app and skip across. So I always skip all the ads. But if you did a 15-second ad, and some podcasts are doing this, I listen to it because I know I'm going to fast forward too far and then miss part of the actual meat that I'm interested in. So
that's right.
Little tip.
So what you're basically saying is live reads are better than pre-recorded 30-second.
Assuming they're 15 seconds long, because if they're longer than that, I skip through the live reads too.
Yeah, but that's tactical. You probably have a list of 20 things in your head that you know to do and what not to do, right?
Yeah, and that's me. I mean, I'm a podcasting nerd. Another tip quickly is to take a screenshot of your podcast player, your podcasting app. If you're listening to this podcast right now and there's a really amazing point, take a screenshot with your phone so that you can return to the timeline to that part later to return to that point.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
By the way, and I was going to return to almost like the point of this whole overarching topic between like the ads versus the branded content, right? Because there are kind of like some differences there, even though I think that it's starting to get blurred what is an ad, what isn't.
Which is sad.
Yeah, which is sad. But I think
you should know when you're hearing an ad versus not.
100%. But
the guys at Gimlet do a good job with that because they play music under the ad read.
Okay, but we're not talking about ads and podcasts, because I think that's a whole nother conversation that we've covered off on the show many times before. This is mainly about branded podcasts, companies that are doing podcasts for themselves. And there's lots of great examples of, like you brought up Gimlet. Gimlet was sold for $200 million, not because it had a lot of great content, but because it also had a great operation that was making a lot of money doing branded podcasts. Right. I mean, it is a big business. It's creating a lot of opportunity and a lot of jobs in the industry. What's at question is whether or not the content being created is worthwhile. I mean, there are some great examples of some companies that are doing a really excellent job with this. I mean, like Dell Computer hired Walter Isaacson to do a podcast, and it's kind of like the Colgate Radio Hour. It's not so much about being a couple of guys at Dell Computer talking about how great a Dell computer is. It's specifically content that is sponsored and produced by the brand,
and that's, by the
entertain.
way, Bob, I mean, I think that, like we talk about whether or not that content is good. I mean, the truth of the matter is it does depend. And I have seen some good examples of some strong branded content where, and this is, maybe it's just my opinion, but I really do believe in the listener to be able to distinguish between good content and bad content. And essentially, if it's good content, but it's branded content, they will listen. The issue is that a lot of brands, it's not native to their DNA to do this well. And so I would say more than 1 out of 2 is not necessarily good, but that the audience is open and receptive to listening to a strong branded podcast, assuming it's worth listening to.
And that, for me, that's the be-all, end-all. One more point on this before we move on. What do you guys think about the idea of podcasts being a great way for internal communications, a great means of internal communications? I think everybody always thinks about podcasts as being something that goes out to, a branded podcast is something that goes out to the marketplace and attracts new buyers. When in reality, the people who are listening to your podcast and engaging with your content tend to be customers. It tends to be, or employees. So what do you think about a podcast from a branded standpoint designed entirely to enhance the consumer base, the customer base in some meaningful way, as opposed to trying to be an ad to get new buyers of the product into the marketplace?
Just to make sure I'm clear, are you saying an internal podcast for
I'm saying
employees?
I'm saying internal podcasts, or podcasts just for members of a membership organization, or even podcasts that are just aimed at customers, not aimed at prospects at all, but entirely based on how to get the most out of what you're using our product to do.
Like, I think with all content marketing, you need to focus on the end user or the consumer, right? So in the example that you're saying, depending on the type of business, if you're, a tech or, somewhat of an innovative business, then I see that and your employees are savvy enough to understand how to subscribe to podcasts, because believe it or not, people still don't know. Then that would really apply to that type of business. But like with all things, it really matters, if your employees are savvy enough, then I think that's an interesting idea, to be able to share like a weekly podcast about news from your industry or some internal stuff. Keeping in mind, of course, those MP3s can be leaked. So keeping that in mind as well.
Right, of course. I mean, Lisa, what are your thoughts on that? Does that satisfy the concern of a branded podcast, or is that just more of the same?
No, I think that's interesting. I think a lot of, I go to a lot of websites, to be honest with you, that has like, oh, this is how you do it. You have this product. This is how you hook it up. This is how the service goes. That's great. But when I'm interested in a brand, or I want to know more about a particular topic, I'm looking for podcasts. And honestly, if I see branded podcasts, I tend to skip over them, because I just don't know how factual the information is going to be, or how it's just going to be geared for that company. And I'm not saying it would be necessarily bad podcasts. I tend to want to go to an expert that isn't being bought.
It's funny though, like I'm looking through the podcasts I'm subscribed to, and beyond the media podcasts, most of them are independent podcasts. So like the BeanCast, So where, you have sponsors, and God bless you, sponsors of the BeanCast, because I love you guys. But for most of the podcasts I listen to are sort of independent podcasts. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people who have podcasts, unless you're like a hobbyist and you're doing it just for fun, you're doing it for business purposes as well, to help build your own brand in a way. So
I just want to close this topic by saying the BeanCast has always been a branded podcast, but it's just like it's become something a little bit more over the years just because it actually was good content. So I mean, there's an argument to be made in either case. But
Bob, but look at the talent you attract.
I know.
God. Wow.
And also us.
I think that's the name of the podcast this episode, and also us.
There you go.
Yes.
Well, it's time for the Ad Fail 5, but before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Dave Delaney. You can find him at futurefourth.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Dave. What would you like to promote?
Bob, I've plugged this a few times here, and I would encourage your listeners to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. It's called The Nice Maker. It's at nicemaker.co.co. And every Friday I round up the best content that I find online each week, with some other stories and things like that are all sort of nice, because there's too much garbage out there right now, and negativity. And I've been in this game for a long time, and I really like to just share some good stuff. So nicemaker.co is my shameless plug.
Nicemaker.co. Fantastic. Everybody should check that out. Next up, we have Jeremy Goldman. You can find him at proponent.agency. That's his new home, where his company is now part of their bigger organization. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
I can't really tell whether or not I want to promote Future Proof, my podcast on the future of everything from personal branding to drones to machine learning, or if I should promote my burgeoning midlife crisis as a stand-up comedian, where you can see me all over and you can see me all over New York performing, as well as a few dates out west soon. So I can't tell which of those two I should focus on. So I'm not going to mention either.
Okay, fantastic. Glad that you chose not to promote either of them. That's fantastic.
There you go.
Next up, we have Lisa Laporte. You can find her at twit.tv, or you can find her at artisanalagency.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Lisa. What would you like to promote?
Well, I think for this show, we got to promote the BeanCast, because all I know is if I come back on this show, I want to be on the same panel.
There you go.
I'd like to promote our newest show, Hands on Tech, on twit.tv. So if you guys are curious about all the new hottest gadgets that are out there, come check it out.
Oh, fantastic. And Twit has so many great shows. I mean, if those of you have not heard This Week in Tech, the flagship program there, a lot of what this show is modeled after a lot of what Leo's done over at that network. So fantastic stuff. Yeah. Great show. Next up, Jonathan Sackett. You can find him at allscope.com. That's the home of the agency where he is president and chief creative officer. So tell us what's going on in your world, Jonathan. What would you like to promote?
Oh my goodness. Lisa stole my thunder, because I always promote the BeanCast. I think it's good. I think it's good for people. I think I get so many contacts through it. I think it's a wonderful thing. I would also add that my fellow panelists here, you could do a heck of a lot worse than doing business with any of these guys. So I would promote them. Follow them on Twitter, connect with them on LinkedIn. I think it's a good thing. The Final Four is coming up soon, as you guys all know, I'm partners with Jamal Mashburn. So we've got something big coming up in an announcement with the Final Four. And it involves, I can't say what this relationship is, but you guys could probably guess. If you get a chance, look up Revolution Cannabis. So on Twitter, it's Revolution Canna, C-A-N-N-A, and Revolution Cannabis. And Mashburn Enterprises and Allscope is going to have a very, very big announcement within the next week or two at the latest. So I thought it was going to come down on Friday, but it's got they're a wonderful corporation. So if you guys are following the cannabis industry, it's got topical solutions for pets, for hip dysplasia, things like that. It's got medical, It's got consumer, it's got retail, revolution, and it's based out of Chicago, where I currently am. I'm between Chicago, New York, and Miami and LA. So anyway, something big is coming. Keep an eye out for that. Keep your eye on Jamal Mashburn. Keep your eye on Jonathan Sackett, and keep your eye on Allscope. We got some big stuff coming.
Yeah, a lot of big news going out of that place these days. So fantastic. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. This first one just tickles me to death. Republican Congressional Representative Devin Nunes has managed to do the absolute worst thing to do when responding to Twitter trolls, Lisa. He gave them a voice. His baseless $250 million lawsuit against Twitter for not shutting down 2 parody accounts has actually raised their profiles and given one of the accounts, at Devin Cal, which is Devin Nunes Cal, more followers than even the congressman has. I mean, why pick a fight with Twitter trolls over parody accounts?
Oh God, why pick a fight with anyone on Twitter? You'll lose.
Don't feed the trolls.
Oh my gosh. Please, politicians, hire somebody that understands how Twitter works and make sure Donald Trump sees them too.
Thank you.
Now, next up, it's looking more and more like the EU won't be satisfied until they find Google out of existence, Jeremy. They've levied yet another couple $2 billion fine against the search giant over anti-competitive practices surrounding their AdSense product this time. I'm not sure who to award this ad fail to. Google for being so anti-competitive in the European Union, or the European Union for being so just damn ignorant about how things work.
I think that's probably a fair one for them to split, because I think it's one of those examples where you can say it's mutually assured destruction, right? I mean, you have a massive entity that doesn't understand how something works, and it really does kind of beg the question, who's advising them on tech policy. I'm sure there's some kind of answer, and you should probably have them on a future BeanCast. But I think that Google also, ultimately there's a lot of money being left on the table by not working better with regulators before they get to this point where, ultimately it's just costing their bottom line.
Now, next up, Facebook admitted that hundreds of millions of user passwords were stored in plain text on company servers, Jonathan. The company says that the data was never compromised by outsiders. And of course, we can totally trust Facebook employees themselves with this kind of data access, can't we?
You know what? I have said this since I first heard of Facebook, and I will quote myself: Facebook means trust.
Well put. Okay, a clever ad fraud scheme that was discovered to be leveraging Android devices to stack video ad plays, Dave. Let me try this again. A clever ad fraud scheme was discovered to be leveraging Android devices to stack video ad plays so that while you might be seeing one ad playing on your Android phone, up to 10 would be running in the background. Now, this is not new, but it is interesting that it was so targeted on the Android system, and it was so effective at stealing hundreds of millions of dollars, uncounted amount of money from advertisers.
Yeah, that's a lot of ad plays. Like, I don't know. That's far too many for me anyway. Like, one ad is good enough for me.
Well, you know what? This was my spoiler from Jeremy earlier, and I was calling it the 1 for 10 Android deal. Think about it.
What a deal.
Yes.
And last but not least, I'm going to go to Lisa on this one. Medical robots enabling distance consultations with specialists sounds like a really, really great idea and makes for very interesting commercials. You see people in rural areas getting the kind of care that only people in the cities could get. However, as Kaiser Permanente found out, they tend to create a PR nightmare when the doctor using the technology decides to deliver the news that you only have a few months to live via a distance learning robot. Some really bad news, Lisa, has to be delivered in person, right? I mean, it's just like you can't do everything by robot.
Oh, it's Kaiser. I'm so not surprised. I keep hoping that since we lived in a, first world nation, that we might actually start to have first world medical care, but not yet, apparently.
Too much to hope for. We'll have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it. Comment online. Use the hashtag #AdFail5. That's #AdFail and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.